Now, we are going to begin this evening by removing a very great burden from your shoulders. And that burden is the belief that fear belongs to you. That fear originates in you, that it is caused by your thinking, your upbringing, your temperament, your history, or your failures. And I want you to understand at the very outset that if you leave here tonight still believing that fear is personal, still believing that anxiety is something you must conquer, manage, or overcome, then I have failed in my work. Fear is not personal. Fear has never been personal. Fear does not belong to you any more than darkness belongs to the room when the light is turned off. Fear is not an attribute of man. Fear is not a condition of the soul. Fear is not a punishment. Fear is not even a problem to be solved. Fear is an appearance, and appearances are never causes. The scripture tells us, God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. That is not poetry. That is law. If God has not given fear, then fear has no divine origin. And if fear has no divine origin, it has no authority, no law, no continuity, and no right to remain. Yet we see fear everywhere. We feel it. We experience it. We are tempted by it. And so the question naturally arises, if fear is not of God, where does it come from? Now, the human mind immediately wants an answer that points to something tangible. It wants to say, it comes from my childhood, or it comes from trauma, or it comes from the state of the world, or it comes from my body, or it comes from my thoughts. But all of these explanations, however comforting they may seem, still fasten fear to a person. And the moment fear is fastened to a person, the person feels responsible for fixing it. But I tell you plainly, and I tell you on the authority of spiritual revelation, not one person in this room caused their own fear. Not one person here manufactured their anxiety. Not one person here invited overthinking into their consciousness. These are not personal creations. They are impersonal suggestions. Jesus said, in the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. He did not say, you must overcome the world. He did not say, you must wrestle with the world. He did not say, you must analyze the world. He said, I have overcome the world. And that tells us something very important. The world, with all its fears and threats and alarms, is already an overcome state. It is not something you are meant to battle. Now, when Scripture speaks of the world, it is not speaking of geography. It is speaking of a state of consciousness. It is speaking of a way of seeing. It is speaking of what Paul called the carnal mind. And Paul is very clear about this. He says, the carnal mind is enmity against God. He does not say it is weak. He does not say it is sick. He does not say it is misguided. He says it is enmity. That means it stands opposed to truth, not as a power, but as a false premise. And here is where we must be very careful. The carnal mind is not your mind. It is not my mind. It is not a personal possession. It is a universal belief in life apart from God. It is the assumption that there is an existence, a power, a law, an activity outside of divine being. And fear is one of the chief forms through which this belief announces itself. The psalmist writes, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Notice that he does not say, I will overcome my fear. He does not say, I will reason myself out of fear. He says, I will fear no evil. Why? Because fear dissolves in the presence of God, not by effort, but by recognition. Fear cannot stand where God is realized, because God is omnipresence, and fear requires distance. Fear requires separation. Fear requires the belief that something is outside of God and outside of harmony. Now let us be very honest with ourselves. Fear feels real. Anxiety feels real. Overthinking feels relentless. But feeling real does not make something real. In a dream, the danger feels real. The body reacts. The heart races. The emotions surge. Yet when you awaken, you do not go looking for the criminal from the dream. Why? Because you understand that the entire experience had no substance, no law, no cause. In the same way, fear in human experience is not evidence of danger. It is evidence of belief. It is evidence of a suggestion being entertained. And that suggestion is never personal. It is always universal. It is always impersonal. It comes to all alike. It comes to the saint and the sinner, the child and the adult, the spiritually devoted and the spiritually indifferent. It is no respecter of persons. That is why Jesus could say, Why are ye fearful, O ye of little faith? He was not condemning. He was not criticizing. He was not blaming. He was pointing out that fear arises where faith, that is, conscious awareness of God, has been eclipsed by appearance. And the moment God is consciously realized, fear has nothing to attach itself to. Now, I want you to hear this very carefully, because this is where the relief begins. You are not here tonight to learn how to get rid of fear. You are not here to learn how to control your thoughts. You are not here to learn how to manage anxiety. You are here to learn that fear has no personal owner, no personal cause, and no personal history. It is not yours. It never was yours. The prophet Isaiah tells us, Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. That is not a command to the human mind. It is a revelation of presence. I am with thee. Where God is realized, fear is absent, not because fear has been fought, but because fear has been exposed as groundless. And so tonight, we begin by laying down the false burden of personal responsibility for fear. You did not create it, you are not sustaining it, and you will not be the one to destroy it. Fear disappears the same way darkness disappears, not by effort, but by the entrance of light. Perfect love casteth out fear. Not human love, not emotional reassurance. Perfect love, divine love, casts out fear, because love reveals the allness of God. And where allness is known, there is no room for threat, no room for anticipation of evil, no room for dread. So let us rest here for a moment in this simple truth. Fear is not personal. Anxiety is not personal. Overthinking is not personal. These are not conditions of you. They are appearances arising from a belief in separation from God. And the moment that belief is challenged, not by argument, but by recognition, its effects begin to dissolve. This is our foundation. We go no further until this is understood, because as long as fear is believed to be personal, the work remains human. But when fear is recognized as impersonal, the way opens for spiritual realization. And that is where we are going. Now that we have removed the burden of personal responsibility for fear, we are prepared to take the next step. And this is the step that most students resist for a very long time. They resist it because it offends human pride, and it also offends human guilt. It offends pride because it denies personal power, and it offends guilt because it removes personal blame. Yet this step is essential, and without it, spiritual healing remains only a theory. We must come to see that fear is not merely impersonal, but that it arises from what I have come to call universal hypnotism. And I want to make this very clear from the beginning. Hypnotism is not a power. Hypnotism is not an entity. Hypnotism is not an intelligence. Hypnotism is not something acting upon you. Hypnotism is a term used to describe the appearance of reality without substance, law, or cause. In Scripture, this same thing is referred to in many ways. Paul calls it the carnal mind. The Old Testament reveals it in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, where a creation appears that God never made. Jesus refers to it when he says, "The devil is a liar and the father of it." Notice, a liar, not a creator. A liar can only deceive. It cannot produce. A lie has no power to act. It only has the ability to be believed. Universal hypnotism is simply the belief in a selfhood apart from God, a life apart from God, a law apart from God, a power apart from God. And the moment that belief is accepted, appearances begin to form, appearances of danger, lack, disease, hatred, fear, limitation. Not because they are created, but because belief gives form to suggestion. The psalmist says, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." This has been misunderstood for centuries. It does not mean that your personal thinking creates reality. It means that identification determines experience. When consciousness identifies with God as the only being, harmony appears. When consciousness identifies with separation, discord appears. The thinking does not create, it reveals what is being believed. Now, universal hypnotism does not select its victims. It does not say, this one deserves fear and that one does not. It does not say, this one is spiritual and that one is not. It operates universally, impersonally, automatically, wherever belief in separation is entertained. That is why fear can come to a child who has never sinned and to a saint who has devoted their life to prayer. That is why anxiety can strike in moments of apparent peace. It is not personal. It is suggestion. Jesus healed by exposing this fact when he stood before the storm and said, "Peace, be still." He was not commanding wind and waves. He was addressing a false sense of power. He was recognizing that the storm had no law to sustain it. And when consciousness no longer accepted the storm as power, it ceased to appear. Now, let us understand something very important. Hypnotism cannot be fought. Hypnotism cannot be reasoned with. Hypnotism cannot be corrected. Hypnotism collapses only when it is recognized as hypnotism. A man under hypnosis does not awaken by arguing with the images he sees. He awakens when the spell is broken, and the spell is broken not by effort, but by awakening. That is why Jesus never dealt with conditions. He never analyzed causes. He never asked how long the illness had been present. He never inquired into family history. He never probed the patient's moral state. He went directly to the root, and the root was always the same: belief in a power apart from God. When he said to the blind man, "Receive thy sight," he was not transmitting power. He was recognizing sight as already present. When he said to Lazarus, "Come forth," he was not overcoming death. He was denying death's reality. He knew that death was part of the Adam dream, not part of God's creation. And so we must come to see fear in the same way. Fear is not something happening to you. Fear is not a condition in your nervous system. Fear is not stored trauma. Fear is an image projected by belief, and belief itself has no power once it is exposed. The prophet Hosea writes, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, not for lack of effort, not for lack of goodness, not for lack of discipline, for lack of knowledge." And the knowledge that is lacking is this, that God is the only power, and there is nothing outside of God to fear. Universal hypnotism appears very convincing because it is shared. When millions believe in danger, danger seems real. When millions believe in lack, lack seems real. When millions believe in fear, fear seems justified. But truth is not determined by consensus. Truth is determined by God. Jesus stood alone against the beliefs of his time. He stood against disease, sin, death, hatred, and fear not by opposing them, but by refusing to grant them reality. And that refusal was not stubbornness. It was spiritual understanding. Now I want you to see how gentle this truth is. If fear were personal, you would be trapped in it. If fear were caused by your mind, you would be responsible for fixing your mind. If fear were a power, you would be required to fight it. But because fear is hypnotic suggestion, impersonal, substanceless, lawless, it can be dropped the moment it is recognized. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Not do something, not practice something, know the truth. And the truth is not a statement. The truth is the recognition that God alone is, and therefore fear is not. So we do not say, "I must not be afraid." That is still hypnotism arguing with itself. We say consciously or unconsciously, "This is not power, this is not law, this is not God." And in that recognition, the spell begins to weaken. We are not yet at the point of silence. We are still laying the foundation. We are identifying the nature of the enemy not as an enemy, but as a nothingness. And when you truly see that fear has no substance, no intelligence, no continuity, you will feel something begin to loosen inside, not because fear has been conquered, but because it has been seen through. This, then, is universal hypnotism, the belief in a life apart from God, presenting itself as fear, anxiety, and overthinking. It is not personal, it is not powerful, and it is not permanent. And now, having named it, we must go one step further. For if hypnotism has no power of its own, how does it seem to operate at all? And the answer to that will take us to the next unfoldment. Now we come to a point that is absolutely essential to your freedom, and yet it is one of the most difficult points for the human mind to accept. The reason it is difficult is because the human mind either wants credit or blame. It wants to be the cause of good, or it wants to be responsible for evil, and spiritual truth denies both. The human mind is not the cause of fear. It never was. The human mind is not the origin of anxiety, nor is it the creator of overthinking. The human mind is merely the medium through which suggestion passes when it is not illumined by spiritual awareness. Let us be very clear about this. If the human mind were the cause of fear, then fear would vary according to intelligence, education, morality, or spiritual study. But we see that this is not the case. We see brilliant minds plagued by anxiety and simple minds at peace. We see devoted students of truth suddenly gripped by fear, and those with no spiritual interest living without it. This alone should tell us that the mind is not the source. Paul tells us, "Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind." Notice that he does not say, create a new mind. He does not say, fix your mind. He says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That implies that the mind is something that can be illumined, something that can be brought under a higher influence, but not something that possesses independent power. The human mind, left to itself, is the instrument of what we have called universal hypnotism. It accepts appearances. It reasons from evidence. It reacts to what it sees, hears, and feels. And because it does this automatically, it appears to be powerful, but in truth, it is only echoing the suggestions it receives. Now here is where self-blame enters, and it must be removed. Many students say, if only I could control my thoughts, I would be free. Others say, if only I could stop thinking, I would be at peace. And both statements still assume that the mind is the power. They still assume that the burden rests on the person. But Scripture tells us something very different. Not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. If freedom came through mental discipline, Jesus would have taught technique. If peace came through thought control, he would have instructed us in mental exercises. Instead, he said, take no thought, and then he explained why. Your Father knoweth what things ye have need of. In other words, thought is not the channel of divine action. Thought is the channel of human reaction. And as long as consciousness is functioning primarily through thought, it is susceptible to suggestion. That is why fear seems to come uninvited. That is why anxiety appears even when you are not consciously thinking about anything fearful. The mind does not initiate, it transmits. Now, let us look at this very gently. When a radio is turned on, music may play, but the radio did not create the music. It did not compose it. It did not send it. It merely received what was being broadcast. And if the radio is turned off, the music does not fight to stay. It simply ceases to be heard. In the same way, the human mind receives the broadcast of universal belief. When it is active without spiritual awareness, it receives fear as easily as it receives any other suggestion. But when the mind is quieted, not controlled, not disciplined, but quieted, the transmission stops. This is why fear often disappears in moments of deep absorption, prayer, love, or stillness. Not because fear has been solved, but because the mind has temporarily ceased to function as a receiving instrument. And in those moments, you catch a glimpse of what life is like without hypnotism. The mistake has been to try to use the mind to stop the mind. That is like asking the echo to silence itself. It cannot be done. The mind cannot free itself because it was never the captor. Freedom comes from above the mind, not from within its activity. Jesus makes this clear when he says, the flesh profiteth nothing. Flesh here does not mean the body. It means human sense, human reasoning, human interpretation. The words that I speak unto you, they are spirit and they are life. Spirit does not argue. Spirit does not analyze. Spirit reveals. And so we do not condemn the mind. We do not hate the mind. We do not attempt to purify the mind. We simply recognize its place. It is an instrument, not a ruler. It is a servant, not a master. And when it is illumined by spiritual consciousness, it becomes quiet, receptive, and harmless. Now, this is very important. You are not asked to stop your thoughts. You are not asked to fight your mind. You are not asked to monitor every mental movement. All of that keeps attention on the medium instead of on the source. What you are asked to do, though even asked is too strong a word, is to recognize that fear does not originate in thought, and therefore thought does not need to be fixed. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. That does not mean stand still physically. It means cease human effort. Let go of the belief that something must be done. Let the mind rest, not through force, but through understanding. And when understanding dawns, when you see that fear is not personal, not mental, not causal, you will feel the pressure ease. Not because you have achieved something, but because something false has been released. This prepares us for the next step, which is perhaps the most practical of all. If fear is hypnotic suggestion, and the mind is only the medium, then what are we to do when fear appears? Are we to ignore it, deny it, replace it, or is there another way altogether? That is what we must now consider. Now we are ready to come to a point where spiritual living becomes practical, not in the sense of technique, but in the sense of daily discernment. Up to this point, we have seen that fear is not personal, that it arises from universal hypnotism, and that the human mind is merely the medium through which suggestion appears. And now the question arises, what are we to do when fear presents itself? And here is where the great mistake has been made, generation after generation. We have assumed that fear brings us information. We have assumed that anxiety is telling us something important. We have assumed that overthinking is a signal to analyze, to prepare, to protect, or to act. But spiritual understanding reveals something very different. Fear is not information. Fear is temptation. The scripture tells us, "There hath no temptation taken you but such as is common to man." That alone should tell us that temptation is impersonal. Fear does not come because something is wrong. Fear comes to tempt you into believing that something is wrong. And the moment you accept that temptation, you step into the arena of human struggle. Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, and every temptation presented to him appeared reasonable. Turn stones into bread. Cast thyself down. Take the kingdoms of the world. Each temptation offered a solution to a problem that did not exist in God consciousness. And Jesus did not argue with the temptation. He did not analyze it. He did not fear it. He simply refused it, saying, "Get thee behind me." Now, this is very important. He did not say, "I will fight you." He did not say, "I will overcome you." He said, in effect, "You have no place in my consciousness. That is all that is ever required." Fear appears in exactly the same way. It says, something bad may happen, something is wrong, you must think about this, you must figure this out, you must protect yourself, and every one of these statements is a temptation to accept a power apart from God. But once you understand this, you will see that fear has no authority, it has no message, it has no instruction, it is merely asking for admission. And admission is the only thing that gives it seeming power. James writes, "Resist the devil, and he will flee from you." But resist here does not mean struggle. It does not mean effort. It means refusal. It means non-admission. It means not entertaining the suggestion. And this resistance is not done with words or thoughts. It is done with understanding. When fear appears, the human impulse is to say, "Why am I feeling this?" Or "What does this mean?" Or "How do I get rid of this?" But every one of these questions assumes that fear is valid. Every one of them gives fear a seat at the table. Spiritual discernment does something very different. It says quietly and without argument, this is a temptation. Not a temptation to sin, but a temptation to accept a false sense of power. And once you see that, the whole atmosphere changes. Now, let me be very clear here. We are not denying appearances. We are not pretending fear is not felt. We are not saying there is no fear. That would still be mental effort. What we are saying is this fear is not truth. This fear is not God. This fear has no authority. Jesus said, "Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment." Appearances are not facts. Appearances are images. They are the forms taken by belief. And belief itself has no power once it is seen through. When fear comes, it is like a salesman at the door. It knocks. It presents its case. It offers its arguments. But you are not required to open the door. You are not required to listen. You are not required to buy what it is selling. And here is the great secret. The refusal of fear is not an act of will. It is an act of recognition. The moment you see fear as temptation rather than information, its urgency dissolves. It no longer feels like something that must be dealt with. It becomes something that can be passed by. This is what Jesus meant when he said, "Let not your heart be troubled." He was not giving advice. He was stating a fact of spiritual consciousness. A heart that abides in God cannot be troubled, because trouble has no place in God. Now, many students say, "But the fear keeps coming back." Of course it does. Temptation always returns until it is no longer believed. That does not mean you have failed. It means the suggestion is knocking again. And each time you do not answer the door, its voice grows weaker. Do not try to reason fear away. Do not try to spiritualize it. Do not try to replace it with affirmations. Simply recognize it for what it is, an impersonal suggestion claiming power it does not possess. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Submission to God is not worship or prayer or effort. It is recognition of God as the only presence and power. And in that recognition, fear has no standing. This is the crucial shift. Fear is not a message. Anxiety is not guidance. Overthinking is not wisdom. They are temptations to accept separation as reality. And once that is seen, you no longer need to wrestle with them. You simply pass on. And now, having seen fear as temptation, not information, we must go still deeper, because even the act of noticing temptation can become another form of engagement. And so we must ask, why does naming, analyzing, and revisiting fear so often strengthen it instead of dissolving it? That brings us to the next unfoldment. Now we come to a point where many sincere students stumble, not because they lack devotion, but because they are too earnest in the wrong direction. They have learned to watch their thoughts. They have learned to name their fears. They have learned to analyze their reactions. And yet, after all this careful observation, fear often seems stronger, not weaker. Anxiety seems more familiar, not less. And they wonder why spiritual study has not brought the freedom they expected. The reason is very simple. And once seen, it is never forgotten. Whatever you give attention to, you give life to in human consciousness. This does not mean you create it. It means you keep it active as an appearance. When you name fear, when you label it, when you revisit it, when you trace its history, when you describe it to yourself or to another, you are not dissolving it, you are rehearsing it, you are confirming it as something worthy of notice. And hypnotism thrives on notice. The carnal mind does not need belief in the sense of faith. It needs only interest. It needs only attention. It needs only the willingness to look, to consider, to examine. And the moment you do that, you have entered its arena. This is why Jesus never asked, "What are you afraid of?" He never asked, "How long have you been this way?" He never asked, "What caused this condition?" Those questions belong to the realm of human psychology, not spiritual healing. They assume that the appearance contains truth, and appearances never do. The prophet Isaiah writes, "Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee." Notice where the mind is stayed, not on the problem, not on the condition, not on the fear, but on God. Peace is not produced by understanding fear. Peace is revealed by understanding God. Now, the human mind argues, "But I must understand my fear in order to be free of it." That sounds reasonable, but it is not spiritual. You do not study a mirage in order to remove it. You recognize that it is a mirage, and you walk on. You do not analyze darkness. You turn on the light. Fear is not an entity that needs to be understood. It is a symptom of misidentification. It is the feeling that arises when consciousness temporarily accepts a false sense of self. And the moment you turn your attention back to God as the only self, fear loses its footing. This is why constant self-examination can become a trap. It keeps attention fixed on the human sense of self. It keeps the spotlight on reactions, moods, sensations, and thoughts. And all of that belongs to the dream, not to reality. Jesus said, "Take no thought for your life." He did not say, "Take better thought." He did not say, "Take spiritual thought." He said, "Take no thought." Why? Because thought itself, when it revolves around appearances, sustains the illusion of separation. Now, do not misunderstand this. We are not advocating ignorance. We are not advocating repression. We are advocating discernment. There is a vast difference between repression and non-engagement. Repression says, "I must not feel this." Non-engagement says, "This does not concern me." When fear arises and you immediately begin to name it, "This is anxiety, this is childhood trauma, this is my pattern," you have already granted it importance. You have already agreed that it is part of your identity. And that agreement is the hypnotic bond. But when fear arises and you quietly recognize this is a temptation, and then let it pass, without commentary, without naming, without storytelling, something very different happens. The mind does not receive fuel. The image does not solidify. The suggestion weakens. The psalmist says, "Cease ye from man, whose breath is in his nostrils. That includes ceasing from the man you think you are. It includes ceasing from the endless commentary about your inner states. It includes ceasing from the habit of watching yourself as though you were a problem to be solved. Fear cannot survive indifference. Not apathy, but spiritual indifference, the kind that comes from knowing that God alone is real. When you are absorbed in truth, error has no audience. Now, many students say, but if I do not name the fear, how will I know what to do? And the answer is, you will not need to know. Guidance does not come from fear. Wisdom does not arise from anxiety. Direction flows from stillness. Elijah heard not the Lord in the wind, nor in the earthquake, nor in the fire, but in the still small voice. That voice does not speak over fear. It speaks in the absence of fear. And that absence is not achieved by effort, but by withdrawal of attention. So the instruction is very simple, though not easy for the human mind. Do not dwell on appearances. Do not rehearse them. Do not narrate them. Do not give them names and histories. Let them be what they are, passing suggestions with no substance. This is not something you do once. It is a way of seeing. And as this way of seeing becomes natural, you will notice that fear has less to say, and what it does say carries less weight, not because you have silenced it, but because you are no longer listening. Now, this brings us to the turning point. For if fear weakens when attention is withdrawn, what happens when attention is withdrawn completely? What happens when the human mind itself becomes still? That is the next unfoldment. Now we come to the place where words begin to fail, not because they are wrong, but because they are no longer needed. Up to this point, we have been clearing the ground. We have been removing false premises. We have been laying the axe at the root. And now we are ready to see what happens when hypnotism is no longer fed, no longer entertained, no longer believed. Hypnotism does not break by force. It does not shatter under effort. It does not collapse because you have understood enough concepts. Hypnotism breaks in one way only, when the human mind ceases to function as a receiver. This is a very delicate point, and it must be understood spiritually, not mentally. The human mind is the activity of hypnotism, not the cause of it, but its motion. And when that motion stops, even for a moment, hypnotism has nothing to operate through. It has no channel. It has no voice. The psalmist says, "Be still and know that I am God." Notice the order. Be still and then know, not know and then be still. Stillness is not the result of knowing. It is the doorway to knowing. And knowing here does not mean intellectual knowing. It means realization. It means awareness. It means the felt recognition of presence. Now, many students misunderstand stillness. They believe it is something they must achieve. They try to quiet the mind. They try to slow the thoughts. They try to enter a peaceful state. And all of this effort keeps the mind active. All of this trying sustains the very movement that hypnotism requires. Stillness is not something you do. Stillness is something that happens when you stop doing. Jesus never said, concentrate. He never said, visualize. He never said, repeat these words until you feel better. He said, take no thought. And that is perhaps the most radical instruction ever given, because it removes the human mind from the center of the picture. When the mind is not thinking about fear, not thinking about God, not thinking about itself, when it simply rests, something extraordinary happens. There is a sense of release. Sometimes it comes as a deep breath, sometimes as a softening, sometimes as a warmth, sometimes as a quiet joy, sometimes as nothing at all that can be named. But something happens that is unmistakable. That something is not peace being created. It is peace being revealed. Hypnotism depends entirely on mental activity. It requires interpretation. It requires labeling. It requires anticipation. And when those cease, hypnotism has no substance to cling to. It fades, not dramatically, not violently, but naturally, like a dream dissolving upon waking. Now let me say something that may surprise you. You do not break hypnotism. Hypnotism breaks itself when it is not believed. You do not awaken from a dream by fighting the dream. You awaken by awakening. The prophet Habakkuk writes, "The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him." That silence is not reverence in the human sense. It is the silence of mental activity. It is the silence that follows surrender, not surrender to circumstances, but surrender of the belief that something must be done. And in that silence, God reveals himself, not as an object, not as a voice necessarily, but as presence, as being, as the quiet certainty that all is well, even when nothing outward has changed. This is why spiritual healing often seems so simple when it happens, and so impossible when we try to make it happen. It does not operate through the human faculties. It operates when the human faculties step aside. Not I, but Christ. That is not poetry, that is literal. When the personal sense of I must do something dissolves, the Christ is revealed as the only doer, the only presence, the only power. And let me assure you of this. When hypnotism breaks, even momentarily, fear is absent, not reduced, not managed, absent. Because fear cannot exist where God is consciously realized. Fear requires distance from God. It requires a belief in separation. And stillness reveals that there never was separation. Do not try to hold this moment. Do not try to repeat it. Do not try to analyze it. Those are all movements of the mind, and the mind cannot possess spiritual experience. Let it come. Let it go. Let it deepen in its own way. Your only function is to be still. And now, having come to this threshold, we must be very careful how we proceed. For many students, having touched stillness, immediately rush back into effort. They try to recreate it. They try to practice it. They try to enter it on command. And in doing so, they step back into hypnotism. Therefore, the next unfoldment is this: how to enter stillness without technique, without method, without turning it into another human practice. That is what we must now consider. Now we come to a place where many sincere students unknowingly turn back. They have touched stillness. They have felt the release. They have sensed the presence. And immediately the human mind says, now I must learn how to do that again. And in that very moment, stillness is lost, not because it has departed, but because the mind has resumed activity. Stillness is not a method. Stillness is not a technique. Stillness is not something you practice in order to achieve a result. The moment you attempt to enter stillness, you have already missed it, because you have assumed that stillness is somewhere else. The kingdom of God is not reached by steps. It is not entered by process. Jesus said, the kingdom of God is within you, not will be, not can be, is. And therefore, stillness is not something you move toward. It is something that is revealed when movement stops. This is why I caution students against techniques. Techniques give the human mind something to do. They offer a sense of control. They promise repeatable results. But spiritual realization does not submit to control. God is not reached by method. God reveals himself when the belief in method is relinquished. Now, do not misunderstand this. I am not saying that you should sit down and try to be blank. I am not saying that you should try to suppress thought. I am saying that you should stop trying to do anything spiritual. That is the hardest instruction the human mind will ever receive. The psalmist says, "Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him." Rest is not activity. Waiting is not effort. Rest is the absence of strain. Waiting is the absence of expectation. And when those two are present, stillness naturally unfolds. Many ask, "What shall I think about?" And the answer is, nothing in particular. If a thought comes, let it come. If it goes, let it go. Do not follow it. Do not finish it. Do not judge it. Do not label it. Thoughts are not enemies. They are simply movements. And movements subside when they are not encouraged. Jesus said, "Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof." He was not saying that evil is real. He was saying that attention to tomorrow is unnecessary. The mind that lives in anticipation is the mind that keeps hypnotism alive. Stillness lives only in now. Now let us be very gentle here. Stillness does not require that the mind be empty. It requires that the mind be unoccupied. There is a difference. An empty mind is a mental achievement. An unoccupied mind is a surrendered one. When you sit quietly and stop trying to accomplish something spiritually, you may notice restlessness. You may notice impatience. You may notice the urge to do something, think something, fix something. That is not failure. That is simply the mind revealing its habit of activity. Let it reveal itself without interference. Do not say, "I am failing at this." Do not say, "I am not still enough." Those are judgments, and judgments are thoughts. Simply remain present. Simply remain open. Simply remain willing. The prophet Zechariah tells us, "Not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit." Spirit does not require preparation. Spirit does not wait for readiness. Spirit is always present. What changes is not spirit, but receptivity. And receptivity comes when we stop directing, managing, and supervising our inner life. We do not go into stillness to get something. We go into stillness because there is nothing to get. This is the great reversal. The human mind believes that peace comes after conditions improve. Spiritual understanding reveals that peace is present before anything changes and that peace governs change. So when you sit, do not sit to overcome fear. Do not sit to break hypnotism. Do not sit to heal anything. Sit because there is nothing else to do. Sit because there is nowhere else to go. Sit because God is already present. And then without effort, without intention, you may feel that quiet descent again. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, simply a sense that you are no longer alone with your thoughts. A sense that something deeper is present. A sense that you are being held rather than holding yourself together. That is not something you make happen. That is something you allow. "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Notice, I will give you rest. Not you will earn it. Not you will create it. It is given. and what is given is always received, never achieved. So the practice, if we may even use that word, is not practice at all. It is willingness. Willingness to stop managing consciousness. Willingness to let God be God. Willingness to rest in what already is. And now, having seen how to enter stillness without technique, we are ready for the next unfoldment. Because stillness is not an end, it is a doorway. And through that doorway comes recognition not of something new, but of something eternal. When stillness has been entered without effort, without method, without desire for result, something very quiet yet very decisive occurs. There is a recognition, not an emotional experience, not a vision, not a thought, but a knowing that does not reason, a knowing that does not argue, a knowing that simply is. This knowing is the recognition of the one presence. It is not that God arrives. God has never been absent. It is not that you attain awareness. Awareness has always been present. What changes is that the interference ceases. The veil lifts. The sense of separation dissolves not dramatically, but naturally. Jacob said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not." That is the entire human problem summed up in one sentence. God is present, but we have been occupied with something else. We have been listening to the voice of appearances. We have been consulting the evidence of the senses. We have been interpreting life through the human mind. And now, in this recognition, that habit quietly falls away. There is no longer a sense of me here and God there. There is no longer a sense of reaching out. There is no longer a sense of pleading, asking, or seeking. There is simply presence, whole, complete, sufficient. This is what Jesus meant when he said, "I and my Father are one." He was not making a theological statement. He was stating a fact of consciousness. And when that same consciousness dawns in you, even faintly, you understand him without explanation. In this recognition, healing is not something you do. Healing is something that is. Harmony is not applied, it is revealed. Fear does not need to be removed, it is absent. The belief in two powers dissolves, and with it dissolves the entire structure of conflict. The scripture says, "In him we live and move and have our being," not in our bodies, not in our minds, in him. And when that is recognized, even momentarily, the sense of personal responsibility drops away. Life is no longer something you must carry. You are carried. Now understand this clearly. Recognition is not sustained by effort. You do not hold on to it. You do not maintain it. If you try to do so, you lose it. Recognition is sustained by grace, and grace operates only where there is no claim of personal authorship. That is why we never say, "I healed someone." That is why Peter said, "Why look ye on us, as though by our own power or holiness we had made this man to walk?" The moment you take credit, you re-enter the dream. Recognition leaves no room for pride, no room for guilt, no room for personal accomplishment. It leaves only gratitude. And gratitude is not something you generate. It is something that flows naturally when truth is realized. Now, from this recognition, life begins to change, but not always in the way the human mind expects. Problems may dissolve quietly. Relationships may reorder themselves. Fear may loosen its grip, but the greatest change is internal. You are no longer reacting to appearances, and that brings us to the next unfoldment. Once the one presence has been recognized, even slightly, a new way of living becomes possible. Not because you have adopted new rules, but because your reference point has changed. You are no longer living from appearances. You are living from awareness. Appearances do not immediately vanish. The world does not suddenly become perfect, but appearances lose their authority. They no longer dictate your inner state. Jesus slept in the storm. That is not poetry. That is consciousness. The storm did not disturb him because he was not living at the level of the storm. He was abiding in the awareness of the Father. This is why he could say, judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. Righteous judgment is not condemnation. It is discernment. It is seeing that appearances are not causes. When fear presents itself, it is now seen as a suggestion, not a command. When lack appears, it is recognized as a picture, not a law. When sickness claims attention, it is understood as a name, not a power. And so you do not react. Reaction feeds hypnotism. Reaction grants reality to the appearance. Non-reaction is not indifference. It is understanding. This does not mean you become passive. It means you become inwardly anchored. You act when action is required, but you do not act from fear. You speak when speech is needed, but you do not speak from anxiety. You move through the world, but you are not governed by it. The Apostle Paul said, "None of these things move me." That is the statement of a consciousness established beyond appearances, not because Paul was strong, but because he had seen something greater. And when reaction ceases, guidance begins. In this consciousness, guidance is no longer something you ask for. It is something that unfolds. Decisions are not made through analysis. They arise through inner clarity. The psalmist says, "I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way which thou shalt go. I will guide thee with mine eye." Not with words, not with explanations, with awareness. You may find yourself knowing what to do without knowing how you know. You may find doors opening without effort. You may find yourself protected without planning. This is not mysticism for mysticism's sake. This is normal spiritual living. But again, we must be careful. Guidance cannot be forced. It cannot be demanded. It appears only when the mind is quiet enough to receive it. And sometimes guidance is simply the instruction to wait. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. That is not passivity. That is trust. At this stage, the idea of being a healer dissolves completely. There is no practitioner. There is no patient. There is no process. There is only God appearing as harmony. You do not take cases. You do not work on people. You do not hold problems in thought. You simply abide. And when someone comes into your awareness, the same recognition that governs you embraces them. He sent his word and healed them. The word is not spoken. It is realized. And because you are no longer involved personally, there is no strain. There is no fatigue. There is no sense of responsibility. You are an avenue, not an agent. Now we come to the end, not because there is nothing more, but because there is nothing more that can be said. Spiritual living is not dramatic. It is quiet. It is simple. It is inward. It is lived moment by moment, not as a practice, but as a relationship. Abide in me, and I in you. Abiding is not effort. It is consent. Consent to let God live his life as you. And so we do not go out to demonstrate truth. We do not go out to prove anything. We go out to live quietly, gently, humbly, resting in the assurance that the Lord, He it is that doth go before thee. And when challenges arise, and they will, we do not return to old methods. We return to stillness. We return to recognition. We return to the one presence. That is the infinite way. And so we leave it here not as an ending, but as an entrance.